This is lesson 2 of unit 4 on collecting and analyzing data. So now that we know how to choose an unbiased sample, we now need to go and collect the data. So sampling techniques include simple random sampling, cluster, stratified random, convenient, systematic, and voluntary response. And again, we learned that in that first unit. So where does data come from? So the primary source is someone who collects data for their own use. Okay? Or a secondary source would be data that is collected by someone else. So primary is you actually going out and collecting the data yourself. Secondary is using that data that somebody else has collected. So for example, Statistics Canada. So I'm sure at some point in time you have gone on Google and you've searched the population of somewhere, and you likely got that population from somebody like Statistics Canada. Okay, so how do you create good survey questions? So just like an unrepresented sample, the wording of questions can also introduce bias into our survey. Okay, so a survey should be as free from bias as possible. Okay, the reason for that second sentence there is that we can't really guarantee that we're going to have no bias in our surveys, right? So our goal is to make it as free from bias as possible, but we know that there probably is going to be some bias in there. So there's a couple different types of bias. So we could be asking something called loaded questions. So those loaded questions would contain wording or info to influence a response. So you're asking someone a question, but within that question, you're telling them how they should feel or how they should answer. Okay, leading questions. So that's when suggested answers are provided. So I give you options basically as your response. So when suggested answers are provided. So obviously if you give options for those answers, it's going to be easier for you to collect the data, right? It's just simply tallying. Do you choose, is your favorite color red, pink, or blue? And you have to choose one of those options, okay? Sampling bias. So we talked about this a little bit in that first lesson, but it's basically when people you survey have something in common, so that would make a specific response more likely. So I'm just going to say similar people equals similar response. Okay, response bias is when people deliberately give the wrong answer or lie. So maybe I send you a survey and I'm your teacher and you're like, yeah, whatever, Miss Ebden, I don't really want to do this. So instead of actually trying to come up with the right answer, you just are clicking off different options because you just don't really care. So deliberately give the wrong answer. Or give the wrong answer on purpose is another way of saying that. Okay. Non-response bias is simply when people don't complete the survey or they leave the questions blank. So do not complete / leave questions blank. So as you can see, there's lots of spots where bias can come into play here when we are dealing with these surveys. Okay, so let's do a couple of examples. So it says, do these questions have bias? So you don't like skinny jeans, do you? So absolutely, right? That's definitely going to have bias. So let's decide what kind of bias that would be. So I would say that's a loaded question, right? It contains wording or info to influence a response. So it's literally saying, you don't like skinny jeans, right? Like, do you agree? It's not asking you, what is your opinion on skinny jeans? It's not asking you, what are your favorite types of jeans? It's specifically, basically prompting you to say, oh no, I don't like skinny jeans. Skinny jeans are out. Okay, so the type of bias here is that it's a loaded question. So it's a loaded question. And if we revise that question, we could just say, do you like skinny jeans, right? We don't have to influence their decision on this. Do you like skinny jeans? And the sampling technique that we would want to go for here. So it doesn't really matter, right? We could use any of them, but what might, and they're up here, this is why I'm just zooming out. So simple random would work here, right? Convenience sampling you probably wouldn't want to do because your friends probably have the same opinion of you as you. Maybe your parents would have different ones though. But basically you could justify any type of sampling. Oops. Okay, second question here. What do you think of the new driving law, 0.5% alcohol or less? So, that's not a bad question, right? It's asking, what do you think about this new driving law? So because you guys are in high school and it is illegal to drink, there's a possibility that if you asked high school students this question, they might have some response bias, right? They might deliberately give you the wrong answer just because they don't want you, or if I'm asking, maybe you don't want me to kind of know that you have an opinion on this. So there's a possible response bias here. Other than that, it's not an awful question. Okay. And then if we wanted to revise it, we don't really need to, right? But we could say, what do you think the blood alcohol level should be? What do you think? Or the driving law, right? The driving law should be. Okay, and again, the sampling technique, it doesn't really matter what you use here. You just have to understand the pros and cons to using each. Okay, so that's the first page of the note. There is a second page where we work through some more examples. Okay. So, example 3, what is the best video game series of all time? Legend of Zelda, Super Mario, or other? So this is giving you those options, right? So that's an example of a loaded question. So if we were to revise that question, we could just simply take out the options, right? We could just say, what is the best video series of all, or video game series of all time? So just taking out the options. And again, for those sampling techniques, you can kind of justify anything, right? You can do voluntary, convenience, random, etc. Doesn't really matter. Okay, and this source part, which I didn't really talk about on the last page, is just asking you, is this a primary source or a secondary source? So if you are asking this question, it's primary, right? If you are Googling the answer there and you're finding somebody else's data, that would mean it would become secondary. Okay, option 4. Are you upset about the construction on Woodbine? So you're asking people stuck in traffic on Woodbine. So obviously the sample you're choosing here is going to provide bias, right? If you're stuck in traffic on the street you're asked about, no doubt you're obviously going to be upset about it. Okay, so that's not going to be a representative sample. Whereas if you asked other people who were not stuck in traffic, they would probably say, yeah, it's fine, like I'm not upset about it. Here you are asking, so again, that source is going to be primary. If we were to revise this question, we would just want to ask to other people. So you're going to open up your sample. Open up your sample size to include other people. Okay, and your sampling technique here, again, it doesn't really matter all that much, but you may want to try the systematic sampling. Okay, you can try that systematic. So example 5. So you do not have to show me, but did you do your homework? So this is like me basically saying, you don't have to show me, but did you do your homework? Likely, if I say you don't have to show me, you're going to say yes, even if you didn't do it, right? So there's a chance of that response bias where you will just straight up lie to me so I don't get upset. Okay, so again, if I'm asking the question, that source is primary. And if I were to revise that question, I'm not going to tell you that, right? I'm just going to say, have you done your homework? Regardless if I'm going to check or not, if I say, have you done your homework, you're more likely to tell me the truth. Okay? And a sample technique here, again, you could justify pretty much any of them, but you may want to try that cluster method. Okay, so, and that means I'm probably going to do the whole class, right, if I were to actually ask this question. Okay, number 6 here, what will the weather be like in Jamaica for the October break? So, I mean, throwing it back here to pre-COVID times where we could actually travel. Maybe you're looking to go over the October break, which I don't even know what the heck the October break is, but whatever. And you want to know, is the weather going to be good in Jamaica? So, there's no bias here, right? You're just basically, you're just asking a question. So we wouldn't be revising the question at all. But you're not going to be able to survey anyone about this, right? What you are going to have to do is you're going to have to look up the information from a source, which means that would be a secondary source. So for example, you might want to look at different weather networks. Okay, so that one's a bit strange, but it's just showing kind of a secondary source. Sorry. Okay, a couple more examples here. So the members of an elite golf club are asked if they will approve the construction of a subsidized housing complex on the land adjacent to their golf course. So obviously, if you're just asking members of the golf course, hey, can we build housing on your right beside your golf course, they're obviously going to say no, right? So you have to ask a wider population or you're going to have sampling bias. A group of professional football players are asked if they have ever taken banned performance-enhancing substances. Why the heck would they admit to that, right? So obviously, if they're asked that exact question, there's going to be response bias. And lastly, Melissa asked her friends about their favorite type of movie. 4 say their favorite is comedy. She reports that 80% of teenagers prefer comedies over all other movie types. Explain 2 flaws in her survey. So first of all, she only surveyed her friends, right? So her friends are probably going to have similar opinions to her. So that would be sampling bias, right? Because obviously it's not necessarily true that 80% of teenagers prefer comedies. It's just literally 80% of her friends prefer comedies. Okay, the second thing is that she only asked 5 of her friends. Okay, so that's a very small sample size. So we can't make the assumption that, like I said, 80% of teenagers prefer this. It's just simply too small of a sample. Okay, so this is the end of the second note on collecting and analyzing data.